Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. Kitchener, formerly known as Berlin, but for some reason changed its name back in 1916, located in southwestern Ontario, is a city of over 250,000, making it the 20th largest city in Canada. A recent court decision from there could have a lasting impact on cities across Ontario, and it has to do with tent encampments. I'm just going to wait for my little gift to go by. No, bumper. I'm just going to wait for my bumper to do its thing. This article is from Global News, and I'm going to be reading pretty much all of it. And I know that it can get a little bit tedious listening to somebody just read a news article. So I'm going to do my best to spice it up and present it like I'm auditioning for a theater production. And this is the monologue I found. When I start live streaming, and I will start live streaming, I think I'll bring some of my improv influence into how I present, and I'll get suggestions from my viewers on how to read the news articles I'm presenting. Should be fun, or really, really bad. An Ontario judge has denied a municipality's request to clear a homeless encampment, building on a decision out of British Columbia that he says established a constitutional right for a person to shelter themselves if accessible indoor spaces aren't available. The region of Waterloo had asked the court to find that roughly 50 living in a Kitchener, Ontario encampment were in violation of its trespassing law. I got a little guest to help me out with this. But in a ruling handed down Friday in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, the judge found the bylaw violates the Charter of Rights of the encampment residents because the region's lack of adequate shelter spaces. Justice Michael Valente's ruling cited a number of decisions delivered in British Columbia that he says establish a constitutional right to shelter when the number of homeless people exceeds available accessible indoor spaces in that jurisdiction. I am not satisfied that the region has adequate capacity to shelter approximately 50 encampment residents, given that its shelters are not low barrier or truly accessible, Valente wrote. We'll get more about what that means in a little bit. Just as the British Columbia cases have found, so too do I conclude that the ability to provide adequate shelter for oneself is a necessity of life that falls within the right to life protected by Section 7 of the Charter. The ruling comes after two decisions where Ontario judges ruled against residents fighting to prevent encampment evictions at city parks in Toronto and Hamilton. In those cases, the judges found there was adequate space to accommodate all of the city's homeless, Valente wrote. Yeah, I would challenge what they considered to be adequate spaces for all the people in need of it. Meanwhile, the region of Waterloo had about 416 shelter spaces and roughly 1,100 people experiencing homelessness. Yeah, with that number having tripled from 2018 to 2021, the decision read. Gee, I wonder if there was, anything in 2018 that happened that might contribute to the amount of people going homeless. Yeah, that would do it. That probably had a lot to do with it. In following the BC cases, Valente found simply counting the available spaces was not enough. The spaces, he wrote, must also be accessible to individuals they are meant to serve, which is really nice to actually hear somebody in authority say this out loud, because all too often, city workers, judges, police, all those people, they like to present one option and say, that's it. And if you don't like it, then you're choosing to go homeless. But to actually acknowledge that the spaces that are available might not meet the needs of the people who would use them is actually, a bit of a step forward. And on both points, encampment residents argued the region's shelter system was failing. Couples testified about being separated from one another when they stayed at shelters. Yes, most shelters are segregated by gender for safety, but then that means if you're in a relationship with somebody, you no longer can stay with them. People who use drugs noted the harm of abstinence-based policies, and others talked about the weight of uncertainty around available shelter space on any given night. Yeah, this is something I experienced when I was living in Toronto and I was unhoused, is just this feeling of insecurity around the shelter you're staying in, knowing that at any moment you could lose your spot for this reason or that. And I was also young enough at the time to be in the youth shelters, so I had, a consistent place, but I was about to age out of it, which meant that I would have to go to the adult shelters, which was on a night-by-night basis, and the prospect of that terrified me. If the available spaces are impractical for homeless individuals, either because the shelters do not accommodate couples or are unable to provide required services, impose rules that cannot be followed due to addictions, or cannot accommodate mental or physical disabilities, they are not low barrier and accessible to the individuals they are meant to serve, the judge wrote. The encampment at the center of the case is set on a half-acre empty gravel lot the region intended to use as parking for nearby transit stations. Yeah, so, cars more important than people. That's usually how it goes in cities. People started to pitch tents there in December 2021, and over the next 6 months, around 70 dwellings were put up belonging to around 50 people, the decision said. Okay, so I'm going to drop my flare, take it down a bunch of notches, because this next part covers, really sad issues. Encampment residents who challenged the eviction included an Indigenous woman who lost her job, was evicted from her home, and had her 3 children apprehended by local family and children's services, a 32-year-old survivor of physical and sexual assault, and a man who had been homeless since he was released from jail in 2020. We respect each other, we consider each other family, and we don't touch each other's stuff, one resident testified. In videos I've done in the past about encampments, I do talk about how these communities are formed and why the term unhoused becomes a little bit more common, because they do have homes. They make homes in the community. So when the city comes by and destroys these encampments, they are destroying people's homes. They are breaking up the community. They are separating people from their supports. The city hired a security firm in March to monitor the encampment and respond to any complaints, mostly from nearby businesses. On June 6, it posted a notice requiring residents to leave the property by the end of the month. The city then made its application to the court in July to declare the encampment residents in breach of the region's bylaws. The judge found the municipality's risk assessment, which is used to justify disbanding the encampment, only considered the risks of the encampment and not those associated with the eviction. A director with the region said on cross-examination the assessment was not well researched and did not consult residents, the decision read. Meanwhile, expert evidence brought by encampment lawyers addressed the risk of being homeless in specific detail, Valente wrote. A doctor noted the ways encampment evictions can disrupt healthcare service and bring risks of acute conditions such as heat stroke or frostbite. Dr. Andrea, a physician who whose London, Ontario practice focuses on people experience homelessness, also noted encampments have benefits, including decreasing isolation and increasing consistent connections to outreach services, according to the ruling. Other experts noted women and gender diverse individuals often report unsafe conditions in shelter spaces and avoid them as a result. Volante said the region fell short of its own policies related to encampments. It did not use all of its outreach efforts to connect the residents or address their situation on a case-by-case basis. They were actually considering the residents of the encampment, how just forcing them to move would impact them, which is a massive change from scenes we've seen in other cities like Toronto and Vancouver, where they just come and destroy it and arrest people and violently assault people. They were actually thinking about the people who needed the encampment, which, it's progress at least. However, he did refer to the region's tremendous and praiseworthy efforts to address homelessness. He noted the municipality had increased its shelter space, double funding for street outreach, and accelerated development of new affordable homes. Because he was most impressed with the region's efforts, Volante said he was prepared to allow the region to apply to terminate his declaration when it can prove the bylaw no longer violated Section 7 of the Charter. So this isn't a permanent solution. The encampment isn't allowed to stay there indefinitely. Should the city prove that they've made enough shelter spaces available, enough accessible low barrier shelter spaces available, and they've done the proper outreach, then they can go forward with dismantling the encampment. This CBC article here, if you scroll down to the bottom, you will find the entire 52-page ruling from this judge, which I am now not going to read for you. I understand that would not be a good call for pretty much any channel unless it's some sort of ASMR thing where reading this in maybe a sensual voice of some sort will help put you to sleep. If that's the case, put it in the comments below and I'll consider it. So from here, usually when there is a ruling that goes against what the region or the city wants, they appeal it because they're not satisfied with it and they want to get their own way. Well, CTV News says Region of Waterloo will not immediately appeal encampment court decision, hints at future appeal if necessary. I'm not going to read this entire article to you. You're free to look at the link yourself. I'm just going to scroll down to here. It's precedent setting. So this is setting precedent. Yeah, that's usually how it works. Across the city, across the province, and across Canada. So I think this is a huge victory, says someone who lives at the encampment. Shannon, a lawyer with Waterloo Region Community Legal Services, said, representing those living at the Victoria and Weeper Street encampment, she was really pleased with the region's decision. We're really happy. We're relieved on behalf of our clients. Some of the folks who are still living in tents in the encampment, who will obviously feel like there is a weight lifted off their shoulders. Yay! There's not enough room in shelters, so they get to stay in tents. Yeah, that's a win. I'll get back to this point in a moment. So more from CTV News. Waterloo Region's encampment court ruling sends a very strong message to cities across the province. Again, not going to read all of this. Very strong message, serious repercussions for municipalities across the province. The lesson here for the region and other municipalities is before you try to clear any more encampments, get a sense of how many people are there, get a sense of what their particular needs are, he said. Don't rush with enforcement efforts. Instead, he said, municipalities first look at what local supports and shelter spaces are available before moving forward with an eviction. Homeless advocate who works in the Peel region to end homelessness says the ruling is a wake-up call to other regions. So, this is a win, eh? A court ruling in favor of people with no other choice than to live in a tent encampment can stay in that tent encampment. Last summer, there were a bunch of heat waves in that area, days in a row with temperatures over 30 degrees Celsius. Good thing they had tents. Yeah. Remember last Christmas? I think they called it a snow hurricane. Yeah, but they had tents. Temperatures dropping to below -20. Violent rainstorms, but tents. Tents instead of proper places to live. This is a win. Anyone who thinks people are choosing to live in these situations are out of their minds. This encampment is right on the corner of two main roads. Loud traffic all day, trucks going by, people honking, fumes from the vehicles. That piece of land is a concrete slab. Fires start when people have the audacity to want food or drink warmed up or to, not get frostbite. Rats are a problem, especially when there's a sudden surge in kind but unaware people donating food around the holidays or when the camp is in the news. It's not like they can store the excess food in a fridge. No showers, no plumbing, no privacy. No one chooses to live like this if there are better options available to them. But why such a large increase in the amount of folks going unhoused? Well, rent is out of control. From Zumper, it says the medium rent for a one-bedroom in Kitchener is $1,900. Waterloo, the city right next to it, is actually slightly more than that. And we go down to this little graph here. Yep, $1,900 as of March 11, 2023. But just back in 2016, April 2016, so less than 10 years ago, the median rent was under $900. It's gone up more than $1,000 in less than 10 years. Kitchener is by no means the most expensive city to live in the country, but Kitchener and Waterloo, the Waterloo region, has had the highest increase in rent rates across the country in the past few years. And there are reasons for that. Waterloo region is not that far from Toronto, so a lot of people have been moving into that area to save on rent because, this is probably about $1,000 cheaper than you will find in Toronto. You see, something else happened right around, I'd say right around here. It's him again, Doug Ford. He became premier, and he got rid of a lot of rent controls in this province. And I don't think this will shock anyone. Landlords have been taking advantage of that, and at every opportunity they can, they have just been increasing rents by hundreds of dollars. They've been finding ways to force their residents out so that they can again increase their rents by hundreds of dollars. This is nothing but unabated greed from landlords and developers that Doug Ford has enabled. Oh, right, he has a lot of developer and landlord friends who benefit from this. I don't think he has many friends that live in a one-bedroom apartment, at least not ones that can donate to him the same way as the landlords and developers can to get in his good graces. People who have to rely on ODSP or OW, our entire checks don't come close to covering the cost of a one-bedroom apartment, which means the most vulnerable people are often the ones forced onto the streets. People who need specific accommodations or treatments. People unable to hold down jobs. Oh, and when you're unhoused, those payments drop drastically because the part of it called the housing allowance, they call it an allowance, well, that gets taken away. The first article touched on why shelters are not good options for everyone. Couples will be separated. People with addictions, in most cases, it's harmful to just stop cold. Even if they're being monitored, going through a treatment program, they'll be denied a spot. Also, no pets. Also, the location of the shelters might not be near supports like soup kitchens or clinics. That's because people don't want shelters near them, so they get pushed further and further from city centers. Also, their possessions. You're not allowed to keep all of what you have with you in the shelter. You're told what and how much you're allowed to have. When a person is unhoused, they keep items primarily for one of two reasons. It's needed to survive, or it has great personal significance. Would you risk leaving your most treasured items on the street and hope the city doesn't throw it out or it gets stolen? The cost of living has been racing upwards, far outpacing funding for supports and housing, while funding for things like healthcare and education have been taking a dive. But that's been the plan all along. Keep people desperate so they work low-paying jobs that feed capitalistic greed while discarding people who can't work in that system. Keep people so stressed and exhausted they can't risk losing a day's worth of income. They don't have the energy to look into why things are the way they are. They don't learn things could be better. That way they don't protest. They don't demand the government does better for the people. And without that pressure, there's never any positive progressive change. The United Nations has declared safe housing as a human right. Shocking. Canada denying people their human rights? Who would have thought? Everyone who's been denied their human rights in this country. That's who would have thought. And I already know some troll will put in the comments, you should be grateful. It's a lot worse in other countries. So, how does stating the situation is worse elsewhere make things any better here? There are also other countries that do a far better job than Canada. No, before you even bother start typing it in. No, I can't move. I shouldn't have to move. And no, I don't have to shut up and be grateful for what this government does because it's worse somewhere else. That's language abusers use. I wish Canada was the country it pretends to be, the country I thought it was when I was a child. Just because it isn't, doesn't mean it can't. If we organize, work together, support people to get into office who will support us and not cater to corporations and the wealthy few, when people clean their eyes of the maple wash and see this country for what it is instead of what they want it to be, is when we can get positive, progressive change that benefits everyone. Let's get it done. Get informed, get involved. Don't forget to hit buttons and leave comments. Twitter! It's getting really bad on there, but I'm sticking with it. You can also find me on TikTok and Instagram. If you can, please support my content by becoming a patron or purchasing something off my wish list. Every little bit helps. Links are in the description box below. A special thanks to those of you who already have. Like the person who got me this pop-it mat. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I probably spend too much time using it because it's kind of like bubble wrap that never dies. Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.